WNYW Fox Channel 5 in New York, this is the 10 o'clock news with John Rowland and Cora Ann Mahalik.
Good evening. The president says we should not be in any hurry to get into a ground war in the Gulf. He got a briefing from his defense chief and from General Powell, and then said Iraqi troops are in for more pounding from our bombers. Brian Wilson reports.
Just back from checking the status of Operation Desert Storm, the president's top two military advisors had less than 24 hours to assimilate their findings for the commander-in-chief. After a detailed session in the president's private quarters, Mr. Bush emerged to issue a reassuring message. The bottom line, the president believes the war effort is going well.
The air campaign has been very, very effective, and it will continue for a while. We're not talking about dates.
White House officials are bristling over remarks from Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev that the Allied air attacks have resulted in too many civilian casualties and the destruction of civilian buildings. White House spokesman Marlin Fitzwater suggested that Gorbachev and the White House media have been duped by Iraqi propaganda. The president went out of his way to talk about civilian casualties and the coalition losses.
That this war is being fought with high technology. There is no targeting of civilians. It has gone far better in terms of casualties than I'd hoped, but we mourn the loss of every single member of our armed forces and of the coalition forces, of course.
And the president gave no clues as to when a ground offensive might begin.
We will just continue down this road. We're the ones that are going to set the time for how this war is, the time for any action that is taken. We are not going to suit somebody else's timetable, whether he lives in Baghdad or any place else. And that's exactly the way it should be.
The president has refused to comment on the operational details of the war. He says he'll leave that for the generals and the Secretary of Defense. When it comes time to make that big decision on when the ground offensive should start, he says it will be the President of the United States who has the final say. At the White House, Brian Wilson, Fox News.
Two Scud attacks on Israel today, the second one wrecking a house and injuring the people in it. During the first attack, just after dark, Israelis headed for shelters, grabbing their gas masks. And some Palestinians defied the curfew in Gaza, shouting praise for Iraq. Israeli troops fired to break up the protest. Another Scud missile was fired at Saudi Arabia, raising new questions about the American hunt for the launchers. Ron Gardner reports.
At about 2:30 Washington time, Patriot missiles reportedly intercepted a Scud in the skies over Riyadh. But Saudi civil defense officials at this recreation complex say it must have been the warhead of the missile that hit and exploded here, doing extensive damage to the building and slightly injuring two security guards. When Pentagon officials were questioned later about how many Scud launchers Saddam Hussein might still have in his arsenal, General Thomas Kelly said he might be replacing the ones he's lost.
We can be fairly sure of what it is that we have destroyed. What we can't be sure of is how many he has left, or is he making them. How many of them they've made, I can't tell you, because they're fairly simple to make. It's just a great big trailer with a superstructure erected on it on which they can place a Scud.
But the Scud launchers are a top priority for Allied warplanes, and military leaders have repeatedly pointed out the Scuds are doing very little to advance Iraq's war effort. On the continuing air assault, General Kelly says we have not reached the point of diminishing returns, but that the enemy forces have suffered enormous losses.
I think the last report that was publicized was 750 tanks were destroyed, 600 armored vehicles were destroyed, and about 650 artillery pieces. That certainly isn't the lion's share of what they have there. Those numbers are higher now, but I don't have exactly what they are.
British commanders also emphasized the growing damage to the Iraqi military through continued bombing of supply routes and valuable fuel storage facilities like this one hit early Monday. Pilots in the war theater and officials here agree there is much more to be done from the air before thinking about a ground offensive.
Right now, we got plenty of targets, we got plenty of airplanes, we have sufficient munitions to drop from those airplanes, so it seems to me that the wise thing to do would be to keep on doing what we're doing and continue to trick the enemy.
Asked when we will know the Iraqi army has been weakened to the point that a ground offensive would result in minimal casualties to the Allies, Kelly said no commander ever knows on the eve of battle exactly what's on the other side. It's the loneliest time on earth, he said. All the more reason to continue the air war. Ron Gardner, Fox News at the Pentagon.
Well, Israel's defense minister heard about one of those Scud attacks on his country while he was at the White House meeting with President Bush. Moshe Aarons told Mr. Bush those missiles are still a big threat. And he said Israel's Air Force could be used to help take out the Scud launchers. In the meantime, the word is the White House is asking Israel to think about holding talks with Syria with an eye toward demilitarizing the Golan Heights.
Saddam Hussein released videotape of himself today meeting with his top advisors and saying he will never surrender. It's obviously for us to see. There's no TV station left in Baghdad, so no one saw the coverage of the arrival of a top Soviet diplomat. Yevgeny Prokofiev will try to convince Saddam to get out of Kuwait before there's a lot more destruction. And the man in the street in Baghdad can see there are fewer streets, and 3 of 6 main bridges have been destroyed. A 4th is hanging by a thread.
And the Iraqis have apparently moved 2 American POWs to Basra, including the only woman prisoner, Melissa Rathbanili. Saddam had threatened to use prisoners as human shields, and the Allies are giving Basra a pounding. Iraq is running its operations in Kuwait from there.
And as you know, Fox